Usually I have to stand behind a lectern and I usually can't see, so this is good. It's been a while since I've talked in person, usually on Zoom with my PJ pants on, so we'll see how this goes. Hi, my name's Sophie, and I will take you through what I learned taking students in the jungle. So a little bit about me. As Caleb said, I've lived in 8 different countries. I'd lived in about 6 up until high school. So if you ask me where I'm from, I absolutely have zero idea. But I work in risk and resilience as a research consultant here in Christchurch, and mainly around disaster risk. So it can be anything from emergency management to community resilience. But when I did my undergrad, I actually wanted to be a zoologist, marine scientist. And my first job out of university was with a company called Eco Field Trips. And Eco Field Trips ran environmentally outdoor education trips around Southeast Asia and further afield. And we used to take international school groups and universities into different locations and teach them about the environment. So this is a bunch of photos I've taken over my years working there. So we used to take kids on various different trips. So one of them would be like an experiential trip. So we'd take the kids out, we'd teach them about the environment, we might do some service activities, work with Rohingya refugees, plant some coral polyps, or we'd just take them snorkeling and actually get them to appreciate what they were seeing. The next spectrum, or further down the spectrum, is we'd actually do syllabus trips. So these trips would be like high school accreditation. So I don't know if anyone's heard of the International Baccalaureate, so IB program. We used to take biology and geography and geology field trips and actually teach them how to do science in the field. We also had university dissertations come out with us. So the knowledge that we had to have had to range from, say, year 4 level all the way through to university. So the lessons I'm going to teach you today are some of the 5 lessons that I realise I probably still use day to day now. And the first one is, not all information is necessary. So we take the students into these really cool environments, and some environments are way more interesting than others. So we'd go trekking in the jungle. So what you see on the left is a chameleon anglehead. Not a true chameleon, but they do change colour with their habitat. And we could get the students to walk through the jungle and go, can you see them? Can you see them? You know, you're looking out and they'd be engaged and listening to you. Or we'd be in the coral reef and we'd be teaching them the difference between a green sea turtle and a hawksbill. So a green sea turtle, herbaceous, eats seagrass, eats algae. Hawksbill has a hawksbill nose, and they actually would eat sponges and other invertebrates out of the coral reef. My favourite is a black-tip reef shark, and the kids would freak out, but I'd actually tell them, do you know what's more aggressive? Nemo. And if anyone's actually been snorkeling on a coral reef and gone up to a sea anemone, Nemo is bloody aggressive. So these environments would be super interesting to kids. You know, there's things that they can relate to. And then we would have, where's it going? This environment. So this is the intertidal, which I think is actually one of my favourites. So the intertidal actually has some of the best animals that are adapted to some of the harshest conditions. So on the intertidal, you need to be able to be submerged underwater, but you also have to be able to survive in high temperatures when you're exposed to air, which means that you can desiccate, so lose moisture. We'd get the kids to come out, turn over rocks, look in rock pools, see what you can find. And these are the things you'd usually see. Not so interesting to students. I loved it. But did you know a sponge has a cell called an archaeocyte? It's practically a reversible stem cell, which is pretty cool. We got a giant clam, we got bryozoans, and we got a brittle star. But after a while, the kids get a little bit bored. And that's when some of the stuff that you learn at university that was really, really interesting kind of wants to come out to play. But it's not always appropriate. So, up the top, we actually have a marine flatworm. I think they're really interesting because they have penis fights. So I don't know if you know in the animal kingdom, but actually being a female is quite energy intensive. No one actually wants to be the female. So marine flatworms start off as male. They all start off as male. Then they have a penis fight. And the first one to stab the other one with their penis doesn't have to be the female. So, then the loser becomes a female, has to carry the babies. Not something the teacher really wants us to share with the students. The other one that we actually really commonly saw on the intertitle are barnacles. And after you explain to the kids that, they float around in the water, they find a rock, they cement their head to the rock, and then use their feet to eat, you start to think about the fact that the barnacle has the largest penis-sized to body ratio in the animal kingdom. They literally have to stick their penis out and sort of feel around for a female. Again, not really appropriate for the kids. So understanding what out of your knowledge base you needed to, tell the kids was really important. But not only that, how you taught them was also important. So in lesson number 2, if someone doesn't understand you, don't keep repeating yourself, try something different. Now, we would get schools from all over the world, and most of the time, they're all kind of on a similar level. But there was one school that we would get that was kind of the bane of the staff's existence. They were from Dhaka in Bangladesh, and they were actually very, very privileged kids. Some of them super lovely, but these were the kids that when you said, get your shoes that you don't mind getting muddy in the mangrove, they'd walk out with Gucci leather loafers. They'd have their maids be called in the middle of the night to get a cockroach out of their room. And these kids, while they were really book smart, weren't really good at transferring that information into the field. And every year they would come and they'd be doing their international bachelorette biology trip, which means that in the field, they would have to be able to do an experiment, take all the data, and actually go back and write a report. And in the middle of the trip, after we would show them each of the environments that they could do these experiments in, they would have to come up with their experiment. And we would spend all night with these kids trying to perfect their experiment. Other groups, 2-3 hours. These guys, 6 to 8 hours. Because they weren't able to take the knowledge that was in their head and actually put it down and how they would actually execute it in the field. And every year, we would almost toss a coin on who wanted to go on this trip, until I learned that it's actually on us to learn how to actually teach them better for them to understand. And it really helped me learn how to teach people better in order, how do I change the information that I have and produce it in a way that they understand. Which is something that we actually used to teach the kids. So on most of these trips, we'd do team building activities. And we would talk about how the information you're providing can be interpreted differently. And we'd run a bunch of different scenarios and different games to show them how often you have to adjust what you're doing in order for your message to be received. And I think that leads me to lesson number 3, which is trust your team. So with a lot of the team building, us as a team, when we're learning to come through and actually take these trips, is really important. So this is actually from one of the inductions for some of the new staff, and this game was called Spider's Web. So you had to get your whole team from inside this little shelter out, and only one person was able to get through a gap. So once someone had gone through one of those holes, you couldn't use that again. And it was one of the common things to kind of get us to bond at the start of a trip, and it's ones that we actually did with a lot of the students that came through. But the most important thing was we're going to be taking a group of 100 kids out into some harsh environments that they haven't been in before. The jungles we would go in had king cobras, pit vipers, just to name a couple of things. In the water, you've got jellyfish, you've got cone shells, you've got a range of different things that actually do put your students at risk. And while you can teach them a bunch of stuff to watch where they're putting their hands and feet, doesn't always mean that it happens. And so it's really important that you can rely on your team to either take over the group you've got while you're dealing with the situation, or vice versa. But I think my favourite memory of how to work well as a team is when we had an issue with one of the staff. Now, I don't know if anyone's ever been travelling and had a upset stomach. And we as staff used to get upset stomachs quite a bit. But when we have upset stomachs, we don't have a nice hotel bathroom to deal with it. We would be in these sort of locations. And we would have a code word that we would use when we would need someone to look after our group all of a sudden while we dealt with our upset stomachs. And that word was Mayday. One word, and we know exactly what was going on. I remember we did a mangrove snorkel, and I had a colleague go, Mayday, I'm just going to go check out that little root down in the mangroves, I'll be back. So I was stuck with 24 kids in the water, and I had 2 extra teachers. And he'd go down, and then he'd come back and go, oh, yeah, we can't go down there. Wasps. Teachers didn't know anything, students didn't know anything, but I knew exactly what was going on. And that was just some of the, shorthand we ended up using when we were going through a lot of these environments. But I think especially another big one is back yourself. So I ended up actually leaving my job with the company because I was gaslit by another fellow employee. I was quite young when I started the job, and I wasn't overly confident. And there was a fellow employee that kind of made a lot of the females feel like we weren't good enough. So nights out, when you drink, and he'd be able to slowly tell you, you didn't really do that right, or you're not really that strong in this spot. And over a year, I noticed that my mental health was deteriorating. So one night after one trip, I booked a one-way ticket to Canada, and I just left. I did think I marketed it at the time as I went to go spend more time with my sister, but I'll be honest with you guys, I just didn't know what to do in the situation, and I left. A couple years later, I was moving to New Zealand to do my master's, and I was asked to come back and take a couple of trips. The staff that had been there when I was there weren't really there anymore, and I came back, and I went on this trip, and one of the new staff said, I'm not feeling confident, can you take this for me? And it was a stats lecture. And it was something that I hadn't felt confident enough to do when I was working there originally. And I was like, I'll just do it. I hadn't picked up stats since I'd left. Hadn't really picked up stats since I'd left university. I did it. I nailed it. I felt so good. The teachers were happy. The students understood the stats. And I recently actually had a paper published, and I think nailing that stats lecture was far better feeling than actually submitting a paper. But, now that I think about it, at the time, I had all that information. I didn't actually learn anything different since I'd left. And if I'd known at the time that I was confident in what I knew and I could back myself, actually, maybe I wouldn't have got myself into that situation. And at the moment, I'm in a different career than I've been in my early 20s. And I constantly remind myself that I need to back myself. I know what I'm doing. I've got the knowledge in there. So it's something I try to remind myself every day. I think my boss would like me to remember it a bit more often, but it's in there. Lastly is there's more to learning than sitting behind a desk. So I think it's really, really important that people learn in the field as well. Going back and doing that trip on my way back from Canada to here made me realise how important it is that we learn in the field. And we had a school group come through, and I'm really bad at remembering names. I'm horrible. I don't think I'd learned my kids' names till the end of the week when I was saying goodbye. But we had this group come through, and I was sitting with the teachers at lunch, and they were talking about this kid that had screen addiction. And we actually had quite a lot of kids come through with screen addiction through the international schools. And I was like, which kid? They're like, Alfonso. I don't know how I forgot the name Alfonso, but anyway. Alfonso, he's in your group. And I was like, but which kid? Which one is it? And he's like, the kid that's been up the front. I was like, he's got screen addiction? They're like, yeah, he has full meltdowns at school. He can't go 5 minutes without being in front of a screen. But yet on this trip, he was up front next to me the whole time. He was looking under rocks, looking up trees, asking me questions, and not once did he ask for a screen. And I think that just shows how important it is that what you're doing, actually doing it in the field, is really, really important. And especially for kids to understand how things are done. especially on like our IB trips with the biology and geology and geography, a lot of the kids didn't enjoy those subjects until they got into the field and actually realised what it was about. So I'm a huge advocate for actually doing what you do in the field. And I've probably gone too fast, but that's the end for me. So if anyone has questions. No questions? Oh, yep.
Do you have any favourite students that you remember all these years from now?
I have a favourite school. So the school is actually Alice Smith in Malaysia, and they actually won an award with how they teach. And I think that was a year 6 class, and usually we had like certain topics we'd have to hit, and this school was like, no, it's student-led learning. Whatever the students want, they can do. And these year 6 kids, I taught them about, I taught them everything. I started to do a lecture on coral reefs, and we ended up talking about why salmon can live in freshwater and saltwater. We learned about thermal regulation. We did what's the difference between coral and jellyfish. And the kids were just so inquisitive, and they're only year 6. But whatever question they asked, we just like explored it together, and I think that was really fun, and it was a really nice way to see how the teachers interacted with the kids and sort of let the kids do their own learning. So that would be my favourite school. And they actually offered me a job, but I quite enjoyed being in the field rather than being in a classroom. So, but yeah.
Those techniques that you applied in that role,
Yeah.
do you find that useful with your current role and dealing more with adults, etc.?
Yeah, so I work with like a lot of different companies, and so I find myself actually in my role, I'll actually end up being translating, because I can often see there's often a mismatch with what someone's trying to put across, and I can see someone else, say in our team, is not quite getting it, and I'm really bad, I sort of interject, but I'll be like, oh, I think, is this what you mean, or this is how, and I think that was probably the most important thing a lot of the kids learnt was the team building. There's a really good game where you'd have most of the group of kids lined up and they're not allowed to speak. You'd have someone standing here only facing the people here with their back to someone that you're trying to get them to do an activity. And the people that can't speak are miming we'd give them like, get the person to walk around like a dinosaur. That was one of my favourites, and like lay an egg. And so the person can't see, and they're interpreting the people that are mining. And the people that are mining can see what the person's doing, and the person that's doing can't see, but they can hear and they can speak. And that was really important to show that, the kids would be there just doing the same repetitive miming activity. But because the person wasn't getting it, they'd get frustrated, and it's like, well, no, you need to change it up. You've got to do something different. But that was my favourite one because I used to make the kids do some stupid stuff. But it did have some really valuable learning in that. So, yeah. In the back.
Are any of those courses available to childish adults?
Well, funnily enough, my dad now runs the business. So if you are interested in doing a trip in Southeast Asia, I can probably put in a good word for you. So, but yeah. Is that everything? There we go. Thanks, guys.